I'll begin by saying a big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge, the show brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter. This week, I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Jamie Shaw. Jamie, thank you so much for giving up some of your time this Tuesday morning to join us for a show of the Responsible Edge. It's fantastic to have you on.
Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Well, Jamie, look, we've got 20 minutes now to give our listeners a background of you and an insight into your experience and the things that you've done so far in your career. Now, start wherever you like. We do have some guests that choose to go back to like the very formative childhood experiences that sort of shape their view of, you know, nature and wildlife and ultimately their view of the world. Others like to start a little bit later, but just talk our listeners through a bit more about you and your background.
I probably need to go back that far to be able to fill 20 minutes, if I'm honest. So hopefully
I will have questions, remember, Jamie. I will have questions.
Good. I hope people are still here in 20 minutes' time. I guess why I'll start with why I'm involved in sustainability, I guess, from a professional perspective. And I think that probably boils down to two or three kind of things through my formative years that had a kind of big impact on me. The first one being I'm from Scotland. I know I don't sound it, but I was born north of the border, and I think I've always had an appreciation in that sense of kind of stunning scenery, nature, your surroundings. Something that's always been kind of important to me. In that sense, fast forward.
Jamie,
yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you already, but just to allow our listeners and viewers to kind of really picture this, like what areas of Scotland are we talking about? Can you recall any particular spots that really, you know, influenced you in that sense, that really struck you with awe, if you like?
Well, I'm from Dunblane originally, but I'll just, in case there's any tennis fans on, I'm the only person from Dunblane that doesn't claim to be best friends with Andy Murray. I've never met the guy. The closest I've got, I saw his mum driving through Dunblane once in a Mini. That's as close as I've ever got to the Murray family. But Dunblane, some people describe it as the kind of gateway to the Highlands, so about an hour north of kind of Glasgow and Edinburgh. And from that point north, you're really into the kind of mountains and very few kind of built up areas, basically. So absolutely kind of stunning scenery. Anybody that's been up there, I'm sure, would agree with me. Very nearby where the SAS has very close kind of links as well. So lots of kind of history with the clans, famous battles, that kind of thing. So just a kind of stunning part of the country. And if you've never been, I don't work for the Scottish Tourism Board, but I can definitely recommend getting up there to have a look around.
Fantastic.
So that's the kind of, I guess, the formative side of things. Fast forward a few years, I was very lucky when I was at school to go on a cricket tour to India, of all places, and an absolutely fascinating country to visit when you're 17 years of age. Very different to anywhere else that I'd been, and a real kind of attack on the senses in terms of colours, smells, and just a very, very different kind of place from the UK, basically. And I think that gave me an appreciation, probably the cricket side of things as well. Fantastic sport to kind of mix kind of cultures and people, but being able to tour around Calcutta and the foothills of the Himalayas as a 17-year-old was a kind of great insight into different cultures, basically. I was lucky enough the following year to also go play in the Caribbean as well. So again, very different. I love their kind of approach to life, very laid back. Nothing wrong with the occasional run sitting in the sun as well. So yeah, as a 17, 18-year-old, having the opportunity to go and see those different cultures, and like I was playing cricket, but it gave me a wonderful insight into how different places, different people kind of approach things. And I think when you get into the kind of social side of things and diversity elements of sustainability, that's where a lot of that kind of interest has come from in terms of my background. And then the environment side, I would say very much driven by geography was my favourite subject at school. from the age of 6 or 7 right through to A levels, geography was really the thing that I preferred doing. And I'm also convinced everybody has an inner geek. Some people admit it, some people don't. My inner geek is very much around kind of glaciology and mountains and understanding kind of how ice, not in massive detail, I'm not a glaciology expert by any stretch of the imagination, but understanding how kind of ice has formed some of the landscape around us, and the fact that those glaciers, certainly in kind of Europe and other parts of the world, are disappearing, I guess has formed my kind of focus on sustainability as a profession.
And Jamie, there's so much to pick out of that, and I love how you've weaved the S and the E into your introduction already. When we're obviously going to be talking about an ESG related sort of subject today with the article, but let me pick up on the glacier element and sort of I want to, again, you're 17, 18, traveling the world, seeing all these amazing experiences through the lens of cricket, I have to say, which I think is absolutely brilliant. I actually myself, Jamie, went on cricket tour to the Antigua and to St. Vincent, Lucia when I was, I think, 15, 16. So I can very much attest to the same sort of experience and an amazing vehicle, cricket, to go and experience some amazing places around the world. But I want to ask you about your education. So in terms of, what you did geography, you were doing geography A level. What did you then do at university? When did glaciers and glaciology become a real interest for you, and how did it play out in terms of what you then did during higher education?
Well, I guess because geography had been my favourite subject at school, my initial thought was to study geography at university. But my slight concern was, if I come out of university with a geography degree, what exactly do I go on to do? And I think back then, times have obviously changed, but I think back then there was still an element of people studied a degree and went into something kind of related with that subject area. And so it didn't feel as though I was going to end up doing something that I was particularly interested in. I'd also studied economics at school. That was one of my other A levels, and I'd not heard of it, but I actually came across a course at the University of Leeds called Environmental Management. And I looked at the kind of subject areas, and it seemed to be a mix of geography, economics, and an element of law and the legal system, particularly in the UK and Europe. And I actually thought, well, that kind of feels as though it's a real subject to get kind of stuck into and potentially leads to something at the end of it, or something more specific, if you like, at the end of it. And I was lucky enough when I was at university to be offered a kind of summer placement by a company looking for somebody with an environmental management kind of background. And they didn't have, as I suppose lots of companies didn't have, back in the very early part of this century. I'm from this century, not the last century. That was a great opportunity to go and put into practice some of the theory in a kind of working setting. But the opportunity, I guess, was there because there was nobody with more experience necessarily in the working world at the time. So I was given that opportunity because nobody else existed, if you like, and therefore they kind of listened to what you said, I guess, because they didn't have different opinions necessarily. And the company was also under pressure from their major customer to be improving environmental management standards, basically.
And Jamie, out of interest, when you think back to your peers that were on the environmental management course with you, was that a similar experience for them? Did you have colleagues of yours that were going off and doing placements of a similar type with organizations that were just beginning to see the need, if you like, or want to invest in this area? Was that a commonality, if you like, for the people that were on your course?
I think not necessarily for people on my course, but what did seem to be common is anybody at the time who got some kind of work placement, perhaps related to their course or just a kind of general work placement with a company, nearly all of them were then offered an opportunity to go back to that company at the end of once you'd completed your degree, basically. I guess because it becomes a little bit like an extended interview. Rather than just a kind of hours conversation, you're actually seeing somebody in the workplace. Can they do something of value, to behave in the right kind of way. And so that definitely rang true for people on other courses. I think at the time, there weren't lots of companies looking for people who were kind of fresh-faced environmental graduates. So admittedly, I was lucky, but my dad had a big hand in that, because he hauled me out of bed one morning during a holiday, and we drove around the kind of vicinity of where we lived and picked out about 10 companies that he said, let's write to them and see if they've got any opportunities for you. And it is one of those 10 that came back and offered me that kind of summer placement for about 8 weeks, basically. So I have a lot to thank him for.
I was just going to say, the good old dad sort of stimulating a bit of action of a 20-something-year-old that wants to spend his summers relaxing and chilling out after a long study period. But
he wasn't very popular when he hauled me out of bed, so I'll admit that. But once I'd got the offer, then obviously I was a bit more placid about the whole thing.
Very good, very good. And just I'm always interested to know, to try and sort of understand as much as I can about the sort of the mindset that you can recall of the 20-something-year-old Jamie Shaw. You mentioned that, you know, you're obviously interested in geography. You have been from an early stage, if you like. You find the subject really interesting. Environmental management seems to be a course that kind of looks more of a practical application of your enthusiasm for geography, if you like, and that's what drew you to the course itself. In terms of glaciers, and in terms of your sort of feelings towards the environment, towards some of the environmental issues at play, can you recall when that came into sharp focus? And can you recall what, if anything, really stimulated that concern for glaciers? Was it a documentary? Was it something that you read? Do you recall what it was?
I do, actually. We've been studying glaciers and glaciology as part of physical geography. But again, and I appreciate, I've talked about going to India and the Caribbean, and I'm going to talk about another trip momentarily. I was very lucky. I absolutely get that. But the moment where it really sunk in for me, I think, was having learned a bit about what happened with glaciers and how they kind of shaped the land, and then starting to understand that they were starting to kind of retreat and recede. When you then stood on a glacier and you hear the sound of a glacier moving high up in the Alps, that's when it kind of really sunk in, I guess, for me. That it's a very difficult sound to describe. The only thing I can say is you need to find a glacier and kind of go and stand on it and listen to the kind of sound in the mountain valley, basically. But it was an absolutely amazing sound. The ice looks very blue when you're up close to it. And that was just an absolutely amazing experience, just to be stood there on that glacier only for a few moments. And all of the kind of learnings, I suppose, at school just kind of started to really resonate far more than they ever had done when you're sitting in a classroom.
That's fascinating, Jamie. I've had a number of shows where guests have talked about like a really kind of fundamental sensory experience that really kind of they can recall and that influence them significantly. And it's fascinating that as soon as I asked you that question, you were just right back there to, that a sound in particular that just stayed with you and affected you. Talk me through then, in terms of you, I'm jumping around a bit here, I know, Jamie, but just bear with me. You've had this summer placement with this company. You've then gone back and joined the company at the end of your studies. Just talk us through kind of what happens from that point onwards. And were you always, since this sort of interest and intriguing in glaciers and glaciology, were you always keen to sort of direct your attention as your career developed towards, addressing some environmental issues? Was that always at the heart of the decision making for you?
It might sound like a long leap, because the company I started my career with made guided weapons. So how the hell do glaciers and guided weapons kind of link together? But as I say, they'd got a kind of commercial driver. And so from the very start of my kind of working career, even in that summer placement, it felt like I was immediately making the connection to something that was potentially happening kind of thousands of miles away. What I was doing on a kind of day-to-day basis. And I guess what then came to the fore in my mind when I completed my degree was that I felt that's the profession I wanted to be in. I didn't want to be somebody that started somewhere and necessarily just kind of progressed through the company, but in different roles. I felt as though I was committed at that point to a kind of future in sustainability, starting admittedly on the environmental side of things. But I felt that any company, as I say, they make guided weapons, but if a company making guided weapons recognises the need to do something different, I think any company on the kind of planet can do the same, basically.
And Jamie, did you therefore? Sorry to interrupt you, but did you therefore know from that point? We're talking, early 20s, Jamie here, presumably. You knew from that point that you were unlikely to stay with one company for a really long time. You were likely to move from company to company, essentially applying that same sort of intention, if you like, that same drive that you've just described within a different context as you went along. Did you always know that was what was going to happen sort of next?
I think there was an element of, and I remember one day in economics, actually, A-level economics at school, the teacher saying, nobody in this room will work for the same company throughout their career. You'll work for several companies because that's the kind of way of the world. And I think it resonated with me because my dad only ever worked for Cadbury or Cadbury Schweppes. So he was the complete opposite in that sense. And I suppose that was kind of in the back of my mind. And I also knew once you made a kind of commitment to the profession, I suppose, yes, unless you're doing amazing things and the company's kind of growing organically and the opportunities for you kind of arise, then the reality was set something up, get it to a good place, and then I felt I should move on and tackle another challenge in a different industry, perhaps in a completely different kind of space when it came to sustainability and expectations that they'd got, and then kind of test yourself, but also you're trying to push the organisations to do things differently and come at it from an angle that nobody ever really had before.
And Jamie, just talk us through what those steps were then, because how long did you stay with that first company that you joined at post uni? It was weapons, wasn't it? It was
Yes.
Guided weapons. So how long did you stay with them before you moved on, and what did you do next?
So I was there for nearly 6 years, 2 of which were on their kind of graduate scheme. And then I came off the graduate scheme and went straight into a new position of environmental manager for the company. So I did that for about 4 years. I was really enjoying it. Felt we were making significant progress. I'd been invited to talk to the UK Ministry of Defence about challenges. They'd lost Crown immunity, so they had to comply with the same environmental legislation as everybody else. And I started to get into some very secret things, I suppose, but of a real interest, if you like, in terms of kind of managing risks and the length of the product service, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really interesting. But at the same time, I'd spotted a job advert for somebody to go and work for the Honda Racing Formula One team, who were keen to promote an environmental message. And I'm a big motorsport fan. You can probably see in the background, there's a few motorsport related items, and that just felt like it was too good an opportunity not to kind of progress, I guess. So I thought, well, I'm going to put my name in the hat. If it comes to nothing, fine, I'm happy in what I'm doing. But, let's see what happens. And long story short, I was lucky enough to be offered that job. And that's essentially why I left my first one. It just felt like it was an opportunity too good to turn down. To go and work in a sport that I'd watched for years, kind of growing up.
And Jamie, excuse me if I've got my F1 history completely wrong here, but are you getting near to the kind of Brawn years here, or?
Unfortunately, I left before, so I can lay zero claim at whatsoever to Jensen's championship year in 2009. I was with the Honda team in 2007 and 2008. Okay. We didn't have a massively competitive car, unfortunately. The image on the car looked stunning when it was parked up, which it did spend some of the season parked up. But when it was going flat out down the straight, it was very difficult to make out that it was a shot of Earth taken from space that was painted on the car. It looked a bit more of a kind of blur. But kind of joking aside, obviously to go and work on the inside of Formula One, I'd essentially gone from one of the slowest moving kind of product environments, because it was taking 8-9 years to go from kind of concepts to delivery in the defence industry, to a sport where your product was being tested and assessed every 2 weeks, basically on the racetrack. So that was quite a shift in kind of momentum and kind of the rate of change that kind of happens. But it felt that was a great opportunity to do things that hadn't been done before, because that's kind of what F1 is all about: testing the boundaries, finding new ways of doing things. And that was a great opportunity to put, again, a bit of kind of theory into practice, but in a completely different kind of working environment, basically.
And Jamie, I'm wary of time, but I'm absolutely fascinated by this, and we obviously need to get through the rest of your career from this point onwards. But can you recall the sorts of things that you were working on when you went into F1? Like what you mentioned that Honda were keen to position an environmental message. Extrapolate that for us. Like what did you actually work on? What did you do?
Well, so at the time, Honda as a brand were very kind of proactive on the environment side of things. So Soshiro Honda had talked about kind of environment and resources arrive at the company, only product should leave. So this concept of kind of zero waste, long before it was regulated, long before it was kind of fashionable, long before it was the right thing to do. So I guess it's how do you then translate that kind of message that the company's got behind it into the world of kind of Formula One. We'd strip the car of kind of sponsorship logos predominantly and just have this image of the Earth. So the role, I guess, was trying to give credibility to what the company was promoting externally, if you like. The most intriguing bit, I guess, was kind of recycling of carbon fibre. The team was using several kilometres of the material every year to create the cars. I think from memory, more of the Honda was made from carbon fibre than some of the other cars on the grid at the time. But we were generating something like 0.5 ton of offcuts of carbon fibre waste a month, just from all of the kind of development work that goes on the car. And that historically was just being sent to landfill because nobody knew what else to do with it. And what we managed to kind of support was actually a fledgling carbon fibre recycling process and industry in the UK. So I remember taking Jensen's engine cover from a previous Honda car under kind of wraps, if you like, to this facility somewhere in the West Midlands and put it through their kind of fledgling recycling process to see what kind of material you could get out of it, and whether any of that material could kind of come back in to the team, if you like, to help cut costs, but also to significantly reduce the environmental impact of a material that is very carbon intensive to produce. So that's the kind of process that we kick-started. Unfortunately, I'd left before we got to the point. I remember talking to members of the team, could we actually get some of that material back to make kind of component parts for testing, not necessarily for the race car itself, but actually for the component development work. And that would have been, we talk about circular economy now as being the thing we need to do. Back in 2007, 2008, it wasn't quite as prevalent as it is today. And that would have been an amazing kind of concept if we'd managed to get there. I don't know if the team ever did, unfortunately, but that was probably the big thing that I was working on alongside all of the good stuff around kind of measuring your carbon emissions or your greenhouse gas emissions and how you might reduce that, working with the team sponsors on kind of environmental messages, and also random stuff like how did we clean the team's trucks and trailers in a kind of environmentally responsible way. So we actually introduced waterless cleaning back at the time, which seeing the guy who came to demonstrate it wearing a suit then cleaning one of the big tractor rigs, was actually quite probably a really good way of doing it, because it really kind of so it's not because the truck was quite dirty, but he was there in the suit just using this waterless kind of cleaning solution and then a microfiber cloth. So things like that, I guess it felt like you could be more innovative because it was F1, and that's kind of what they're looking for.
Jamie, it's absolutely fantastic. I've got so many questions, but I think we're going to have to leave this for sort of the series, the Jamie Shaw series. I'm sure a lot of I'm fascinated by F1. I'd love to ask you more questions about it. But I think the overall takeaway is that you've got an opportunity working within a fast-paced setting to really look at kind of innovative solutions that perhaps were a bit ahead of their time, as you'd expect with a setting like F1. Just quickly, Jamie, talk us through what happens from Honda F1 onwards, just in terms of the rest of your career up to the point that we are at now.
So from Honda, I went to Atkins, that I'm sure many people are familiar with, the big design engineering consultancy. That was a little bit more of a kind of corporate strategic role, if you like. That brought in experience for me around the kind of reporting side of things. So that was something at the time that was becoming a much bigger thing for kind of big organisations to do. So things like carbon disclosure project, creating a kind of corporate responsibility report for the business, but also feeding relevant information into the company's AGM. And actually, I was there the first time that we did all of that, so providing the information to the chief exec, who presented that to the shareholders, who then voted and approved that kind of element of it. So a little bit kind of drier, very different to the kind of world of Formula One in that sense. But in terms of my kind of career portfolio, if you like, it felt like it was an important element to get kind of knowledge and experience of. And that then, again, with the kind of external part of the business with Atkins, very much kind of focusing on encouraging others and working with others to drive kind of environment and sustainability into what they were doing. It was important to have that kind of message behind to say, we're not just telling you guys to do it, we're also doing it ourselves, basically, as an organisation. So we achieved things like the Carbon Trust Standard, went through verification for ISO 14064 on greenhouse gas emissions. So lots of those kind of corporate side of things, but very much around kind of structures and systems so that you can continually repeat and report your performance, basically. And again, that was very enjoyable kind of 3 years. I got quite a bit of international experience working with different parts of the business in Europe, the Middle East, India, and even into China, actually, though that was a slightly more fledgling part of the business at the time. That took me up to about 10 years into my career. And I was conscious at that time, the one thing I kind of felt, I suppose, I'd always done was sit a little bit on the sidelines in terms of the role. I wasn't necessarily at the heart of the business. You feel like you're doing a really good thing and you're adding value, but you're not necessarily at the core of what the company is doing. You know, I wasn't designing the F1 car, for example. I wasn't at the heart of the services that kind of Atkins were offering. So I was conscious that I really should get some experience on the product and service side of things. And lo and behold, I was actually approached because of my experience at Honda by Jaguar Land Rover, who were looking for, it was a bit mouthy, it was technical specialist whole vehicle sustainability. But it did feel like it was an opportunity to put into practice what I'd learned at uni, the first 10 years of my career, but specifically from a product perspective. Mm-hmm. And so I went to JLR, as I say, big motorsport fan, big kind of car guy, despite the kind of role or profession that I'm in. And for 7.5 years, absolutely kind of loved the challenge of trying to drive sustainability forward in an organisation that most people would think, well, yeah, but they make, you know, big gas guzzlers and SUVs and sports cars. How does sustainability fit with all of that? And I felt that was the challenge for me, was to demonstrate that actually you can kind of integrate sustainability even into a company whose kind of product portfolio looks like that, basically. So that was then it's the place I've been longest in my career, actually. And we achieved some what I think are amazing things. You know, the vehicles today have got closed loop aluminium body structures. So they used to be completely virgin aluminium. Those systems now intelligently reusing material with the potential to recycle end-of-life vehicles back in to kind of next generation vehicles. And I like the idea that you've got this bloodline, this history of Jaguar using aluminium for a long time, that you can continue to make cars in the future that have a direct physical link back to cars of kind of yesteryear, if you like. So really embracing kind of circular economy, but incorporating it into the whole reason that you buy the vehicle, basically. China also became a big thing for me in terms of the role. Very concerned around kind of air quality when you're sitting in the vehicle, both from the emissions from the materials, but also driving around far more polluted environments than we see here in the UK and Europe. Mm-hmm. And how do you reassure the customer that the vehicle is protecting them from the kind of pollution outside? So building a kind of feature set that actually improved your health, basically, whilst you sat in the vehicle. Right. And that became a really important element, I think, because that was no longer about regulations and the right thing to do. This extended into, by doing all of those things, you can also make money for the company and kind of feel good about it in that sense. So very much getting onto the kind of front foot, turning a team that when I inherited them was a little bit more kind of compliance focused and at the very back end of the engineering process, into a team that is starting to influence the vehicle through research and development, and also the kind of features on the car, and for certain markets, that becoming a why buy. So that took it to, I would say, sustainability to the next kind of level in that sense, beyond just corporate regulatory requirements and doing the right thing in that sense.
And Jamie, I'm just seeing, as you've described your career, you sort of sought out and experienced all of these different sort of experiences that have given you this kind of collective appreciation of how all these various things occur. And what you mentioned there is, you know, the sort of the value, the customer value that can be generated through the customer experience that can be influenced through thinking about sustainability and the experience of products that are developed and how you focused on that. I am wary of time, though. Give us the rest of your career from Jaguar onwards, if possible.
So I made the decision to leave JLR, and I didn't have anything to go to. And the reason for that was that, as I say, for 7.5 years, really enjoyed the kind of challenge. And don't get me wrong, it was an uphill battle for nearly all of those 7.5 years, even when we got onto the kind of front foot and could demonstrate you could actually make the company kind of money. And then there were kind of decisions made, and it just felt the values I'd got and that I tried to use for 7.5 years now felt as though we're just kind of at odds with where the company was going. I think very different now from what we're seeing coming out of JLR. I think it would be a great place to potentially go and kind of work from a sustainability perspective. So I decided to get out. At that point, you know, you're approaching kind of 20 years, and it kind of felt as though I'd given everything I could to that role. It was time to just, you know, have a bit of a break and go and do something else. Kind of fast forward, I ended up joining Network Rail. So a very different organisation, public sector. But I felt the role I was kind of taking on was a little bit of a kind of niche role, if you like, where you could just kind of get on with things and not worry about managing lots of different vehicle programs and lots of different people in the team, and actually just try and drive awareness about kind of emissions. So particularly kind of air quality in stations, but also greenhouse gas emissions associated with the rail infrastructure. So taking that kind of long-term view of how do you reduce kind of whole life carbon, basically through the kind of infrastructure piece. And that's, I was there for a couple of years, working with all of the different parts of the organisation on that, but particularly on the engineering side of things. And I've always had an interest, I guess, even though I'm not an engineer by background. You've probably picked up, I've worked with guided weapons, Formula One cars, design engineering at Atkins, vehicles at Jaguar Land Rover. The engineering side of things has always had a kind of interest to me. But I actually felt because I was in this slightly niche role, I was getting further away than I had been from sustainability, probably almost throughout my entire career. And I got a call about Carndine, and I must admit, apologies, Carndine, apologies, Mike and family. I have told them this before. I didn't know who Carndine were when I got the call. But the way the job was described to me, I thought 95% of what you've just told me is what I would write down that I think I should be doing at this point in my career.
Fascinating.
So I thought, well, I've got to at least speak to them. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And from, I think pretty much minute one, in the first interview process, I felt like I'd kind of hit it off, resonated with Megan and Ed, who are at the other end of the call, basically. And the remit was sustainability, reporting into the group CEO. And I thought, okay, I didn't historically have a particular interest in working in flooring, but the remit and the opportunity to do something different with a business and family that was behind it, I thought that's kind of what I've been looking for in the first 20 years of my career. It's not, rather than pushing treacle uphill, it's still going to be a challenge, but you've got the weight of support and a commitment to do something behind me.
Which, Jamie, brilliantly segues us on to talking about this today's episode article. And I'm going to come back to ask you about the particular job description for Carndine, that, which points really resonated with you. But for now, would you mind just providing our listeners with a bit of a summary of the article? I think it was by Guido Caleccia, if I've absolutely destroyed their name, I do apologize, a partner at Page Executive. Would you mind just providing a bit of a summary for our listeners, and then perhaps just picking out whatever the most interesting points were for you from the piece?
Well, the thing that caught my eye when you sent it through was I misread the title. So the title is From Vision to Action, the Search for a Sustainability Director. But when I saw the title, I thought it said From Vision to Action, the Search for a Sustainability Dictator. And I thought, well, this is going to be a good read. Maybe this is where I've been going wrong in my career. I can assure any listeners or watchers that it is Sustainability Director and not Dictator. But it's really interesting, I guess, to get the insight from a recruitment kind of expert in the sustainability field as to what they're looking for, what they're seeing from kind of clients in terms of expectations. So it kind of walks through a couple of the approaches that they tend to see companies taking, and I can come back to those in due course, because I very much agree with kind of what they see. The fact that sustainability, as I've alluded to in the conversation so far, can and should apply to any industry, any company in any industry. Sustainability has value, basically. So that kind of came out. I would admit sustainability is in a vastly different place from when I started my career. I was literally, there's a guy in the corner who does that, as though I worked for like a competitor organisation or something, not the same company, but we've still got a long way to go. But it was interesting to kind of read their perspective on where the kind of market is at the moment and what kind of companies are looking for. They also highlighted they see three types of kind of sustainability professional when they're going through the kind of recruitment and interview process. I'm not sure I wholly agree with that, but again, kind of come back to that. And then talked a little bit about kind of reporting lines and what the role looks like, and also the kind of candidate who got the particular role that they've used as a case study. So I thought it was a really interesting article in that sense, and definitely worth reading, because you see the perspective from the recruitment consultant, obviously the the customer or the person who gets the role in the end, but also from an internal perspective from the HR team as well. So you've got kind of at least three different perspectives through the article on trying to recruit somebody for a senior position in the business.
And Jamie, just before I come in and ask you to pick out whatever those most interesting points were for you, coming back to your point about Carndine and about the what attracted you to the role when you read that job description, and you've kind of alluded to it already. How much of what's in the article rings true to your experience when engaging with Carndine? And what were the things that were different for you about your experience of Carndine?
Big one, reporting line. Where does the role report into? You know, companies that say sustainability is really important for them, and then the role's buried in like a corner of the organisation in a function that has kind of very little to do with sustainability. You probably need to be kind of questioning yourself, are they actually committed to sustainability? Because if you've got to go through layers and layers of management to get to kind of decision makers, you're going to struggle. Yeah, and I've been there. I speak from experience. You want companies to go, this is important, and it's that important, we're going to have the person report into somebody very, very kind of senior. So for me, the fact that this role reports directly into the group CEO said to me, obviously, you've got to build the relationship and demonstrate why things are the right thing to do or why it's the wrong thing to do, and therefore you shouldn't do it. But you've got far more of a chance if you're reporting in at that kind of senior level to influence the business. So that reporting line is a big thing, I think, for sustainability, and also kind of broadening horizons. I think one of the elements of the article talks about kind of two different approaches that the recruitment company sees companies taking. For me, you've got to broaden your horizons. We've got to a position that's not good. Just getting slightly better at what we do doesn't get you to a different place. It's certainly not going to get you there quickly. So you've got to broaden your horizons and think differently. So again, for me, an organisation's got to be open to recognising the need for change, the fact that they might need to invest in things, but that there is value to be had. And the third element, I think we've linked the two of those together, is long-term view. This isn't about quick wins and coming in saying, yeah, I've been here 6 months and look, we've moved the needle 1.5% on something. It should be about, this is a long-term view. We want a kind of plan, structure and strategy that gets us to a better place. Yes, we've got to act kind of quickly, but it shouldn't be about kind of hopping about and taking like one thing, if you like, and thinking, yeah, we've done it, we've achieved success. You've got to build the right kind of structure and system to give you a chance of that success, I think.
And Jamie, it's so refreshing to hear, again, it's a theme that comes up often on The Responsible Age, talking about the short-termism and the impact that that's having, not just at a sort of a commercial level, but at a political level too. And it's great to hear that Carndine, when you join them, were thinking long term. I want to come back to your second point, though, of the three that you brought up there, to ask you an additional question. You spoke about that beautifully in terms of essentially different perspectives, bringing different perspectives together in order to through that unearth the innovation and the creativity that we need in order to stimulate the kind of changes that are required. So thinking through your career, again, you described, you've worked in defense, you've worked in sort of, in cars, automation, automobiles. You've worked in all of these various different areas. You worked in consultancy. Like you then find yourself approached by a significant flooring company. Was that something that they very much embraced at the time of bringing you on? Do you think the fact that you weren't just a yes guy from the flooring industry who had 20 years experience working within that, you were somebody that was going to bring a completely fresh perspective from the various different experiences that you'd had to how to address some of the fundamental sustainability issues at play, for not just for Carndine, but for the flooring industry as a whole?
And I think actually in that instance, it was the recruitment consultant that Carndine had employed that found me in that sense. So Carndine outsourced that activity, but that again resonates very much with the kind of article. And I think he spotted with my career nothing to do with flooring, if you like. There's nothing in my CV that was shouting any kind of experience in flooring. But I guess what he was looking at is what's the kind of brief he's been given by Carndine, and perhaps he worked with Carndine to kind of build that kind of ideal CV, if you like. And then I've got a lot of that experience, like you say, operations, so kind of site activities and how do you manage that side of things. How do you ensure kind of compliance with regulations? There's more and more sustainability regulations. So like it or not, that is part of the kind of role. Getting into the strategy side of things. So vehicle strategy and future products. At Network Rail, the kind of long-term strategy around emissions. But also the product side of things. You know, I've got experience of working with sustainability on physical kind of products at different points in their kind of lifetime. And I think hopefully what that demonstrated when the CV went in front of Carndine was, okay, he's got no flooring experience, but things that we're looking for, absolutely relevant and bring different ideas to the table. And I think I've seen organisations, yes, it can be great to promote from within, but the problem is if you've only got people at the top who've been there 20 years and they don't really know anything else, struggle to break out of that bubble because they don't know anything else, if you like. So I think you need to mix kind of in-house knowledge and experience of products and the industry with that kind of external, yes, you can do it this way or we can do it differently. You can bring things to the table. One of the things I know I talked about long-term view, but one of the things I could bring to the table was people that we could use to help us kickstart things. I didn't need to go out kind of searching and looking for people that I'd never dealt with. I could kind of bring certain people in to help us with things, basically. So yeah, for me, that mix is absolutely paramount if you're going to have any success, hopefully, and progression from a sustainability perspective.
It's almost like you developed your kind of sustainability toolkit over your career, and that ultimately now is about going in and applying your knowledge, your experience, and your connections and contacts, and who you knew that could do what into within a different context. Let me ask you though, Jamie, for any kind of heads of sustainability out there, chief sustainability officers that are coming into a position who are facing a similar situation, i.e., they've got no previous experience of the industry, but they've obviously got this eclectic, full, holistic experience, if you like, of sustainability at large. What would be your recommendations and your suggestions on how they go about immersing themselves within the industry itself in order to understand it, to allow them to then impart their wisdom and their experience into the sustainability initiatives of the company? What are the things that you've learned about approach?
I suppose it depends on whether you've already got the job or whether you're kind of applying for the job. But one thing I've always found useful, either when you've just arrived or if you're going through the interview process, is actually the things that they're looking for, even though you might not have the industry experience, what kind of carries across. So if, for example, you've done greenhouse gas reporting, you've used the GHG protocol, you've been through ISO 14064, that's of absolute use to any organisation that wants to measure their kind of footprint. You don't necessarily have to have only industry experience for that to be kind of beneficial. I think examples of where I talked about aluminium earlier, kind of closed loop, and that kind of we used to call it a value chain, essentially the supply chain, but a value chain of bringing people together to solve a problem. Very few companies have success from a sustainability perspective by doing it solely by themselves. So those kind of examples, again, aluminium's quite different from the floors that we produce and sell. But the principle of bringing in people and collaborating with them, again, kind of rings true in pretty much any industry. And I think also just taking a kind of moment, if you like, not trying to rush in to things, but just taking a kind of step back and going, okay, what knowledge and experience do I have? How could that be of use? What contacts do I know that could kind of help me in the role? How can they come in and support things and give a slightly different kind of perspective. But it is also important to get kind of knowledge and understanding of the industry that you're in. So spend time with people in different roles in the organisation that you've joined, if you're new to it, just to get their insight on why, for example, do offcuts, when the flooring's been installed, why do they get captured and recycled, or why do they not get captured and recycled? Kind of understand some of those issues, because you've probably got a better chance of a solution that's going to work if you've kind of engaged with members of those kind of teams, if you like, to get that kind of perspective.
Which crucially comes back to the point about long-term thinking, because if you're only going to afford your sustainability lead, if you want to call it that, your chief sustainability officer or head of sustainability, to allow them, you need to give them the time and the experience in order to be able to do that, in order to then have that knowledge to be able to set the agenda and the strategy moving forward. So I can see how all of these things kind of tie up together, Jamie. Let me ask you this. It's a slightly different question, if you like, from the other end, but what in your mind are the most important conditions that an organization needs to provide a sustainability director, head of, etc. with? Like, you mentioned long-term, is it long-term thinking? You've mentioned direct reporting to the chief exec or the decision makers, the board, etc. What are the other key conditions that are required in order for somebody in your role to have the biggest impact they can have?
It's difficult to convince the company that they need this, I suppose, but you do need a company that's willing to listen. And I'm sure there's many people out there this will resonate with, where you feel like you're banging the head against a brick wall because you're telling them something that's based on fact. It might be data, it might be that there's a regulation coming, and people just don't seem to kind of listen or take your points on board. So that is a really important part of all of this. And I do feel at Carndine, that's something that we've got kind of across the board, that people are actually willing to kind of stop and listen to what you're saying. Clearly, you've still got to make a valid case, but I think that is a really important part. The companies need to listen. It's not just about the individual kind of in the role or the teams doing it. The companies need to recognise that sustainability is important and can benefit them. And they're most likely to recognise that if they kind of listen. Like you say, reporting lines is really important. I report directly into the CEO. That carries a lot of weight, but it doesn't carry sufficient weight on its own. You've also got to make sustainability a standing agenda item at decision-making meetings. It's got to transcend the business. It can't just be you and the CEO or the CFO or whoever it is kind of agreeing something. It's got to kind of transcend the business. So one of the things we agreed very early on, and I do say it's sometimes for my sins in that sense, but I report at every board meeting on sustainability and on diversity. So they are two standing agenda items, and we're a global business, so those board meetings can be all hours of the day. But it's really important to get the message into other people, if you like, and get their support for things. The other thing is you do need some kind of budget. Some things, yes, may help cut costs. Other things may, in the future, generate kind of value, additional revenue, profit, etc. But you need some kind of money to support kind of what you're doing. So you do need, again, a kind of board, I suppose, that's listening, senior people that are saying, okay, yes, not necessarily millions and millions of pounds, but the ability to go and spend some money to do some things to improve something, get something off the ground, run a trial, do some research. All of those things will need some kind of pot of money behind them. It doesn't come completely for free, unfortunately.
And Jamie, and again, it comes back to the long-term thinking, because again, if organizations are thinking about things long-term, then that investment, they're giving it time to realize the value at the end of the period, i.e. the likelihood that by investing in sustainability now, we're going to become more efficient, we're going to become more competitive, we're going to become more attractive to potential customers, perhaps not immediately, but certainly over a longer period of invested time. So it's fascinating that I guess you've come up with lots of great suggestions, but for me, that's the one that really does move the dial, if you like, and allows, if you're sitting at board, if you're speaking with your CEO, etc., it's that long-term thinking that facilitates everything else. Jamie, we've brilliantly, absolutely hammered our normal timings on the episode, but I really, really enjoyed it, and I'm keen. It's been great to kind of to just flow through the conversation with you. We will, though, now conclude with the magic wand question. So, Jamie, if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Oh, I know we talked about in the run up, and I still haven't got a kind of nailed on answer. I don't think. It's probably because I want for too many things.
You can't use the magic wand to produce multiple magic wands that you can then utilize for multiple requests. So that's one thing that you can't do.
I think the key for me, based on my kind of experience, is I think there's still a perception for lots of people that sustainability is a cost. It's kind of things that we need to do because it's right, because there's regulations. And actually, it's bigger than that. It's longer than that. There's value to be had. So particularly from a commercial perspective, I would say it's recognise the value that sustainability can bring. And if you can't recognise the value, investigate why, because I'm pretty much certain that there'll be value out there. You've just yet to kind of identify it and get out of that mindset that sustainability is just a kind of cost to the business that you need to absorb. There's value to be had from it, but you do need to invest to kind of get that value.
But that, Jamie, that's such a nice, such a good suggestion. I think that start with that investigation. Can you not invest in some money in at least investigating whether or not sustainability is a potentially value add initiative for you to take on as an organization? Brilliant. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That's been an absolutely brilliant show. Appreciate you giving us your time.
I've really enjoyed it. It's a shame we can't do this every week.
Don't. You'll be like your board meeting. Submissions and updates. I'll definitely be asking you back on. Thanks for this morning, though, Jamie.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Jamie Shaw, Global Head of ESG at Carndine Design and Flooring, for sharing his insights on the evolving role of sustainability in business leadership and the challenges of driving meaningful environmental change at scale. Today, we explored key takeaways from the article From Vision to Action, the Search for a Sustainability Director, discussing what businesses should look for in sustainability leaders and how ESG strategy is shaping the corporate landscape. As a reminder, this episode was brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit antigreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.